They didn't just tear down my house, they did it while my mother's curtains were still hanging in the kitchen window. I knew something was wrong before I turned onto Cedar Run Drive. The air had that dry, bitter smell of pulverized concrete and old insulation baking in the Texas sun, and there was a yellow haze floating over the cul-de-sac like the neighborhood had been holding its breath all morning. I eased my truck around a landscaping trailer and saw the first piece of my life lying in the street, white trim from the front porch, cracked clean through, the same board my father had painted by hand the summer I turned 12. Then I saw the machines. One excavator idled in my front yard with its bucket lowered. Another sat beside a roll-off dumpster filled with roof shingles, broken studs, cabinet doors, and pieces of the house I grew up in. My house. Or what was left of it. The place where my mother kept cinnamon candles on the windowsill and my father stored every tool in the garage like it was a church altar had been reduced to a slab, splintered lumber, and a chimney standing by itself in the middle of the wreckage like it had survived out of pure stubbornness. I killed the engine, but I didn't get out right away. My hand stayed on the steering wheel, and for one strange second all I could hear was the tick of hot metal under the hood and the distant beep 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 of heavy equipment backing up where my living room used to be. Then a woman's voice sliced through it. "There he is," she said, bright and sharp, like she'd been waiting for an audience. Brenda Whitmore stood near the mailbox in a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car, holding a clipboard against her chest like she was presenting an award. Her blonde hair was shellacked into place, not a strand out of line, and her smile had that polished real estate shine that never reached the eyes. Two board members hovered behind her near the sidewalk, nodding along before she even opened her mouth. I stepped out into dust so thick it settled on my boots in seconds. "What is this?" I asked, and even to me my voice sounded too calm, too flat, like my brain hadn't caught up to what my eyes were seeing. Brenda tilted her head, all practiced sympathy. "Mr. Walker, I'm so glad you finally decided to show up. We sent notices. Multiple notices. Past due HOA assessments, penalty fees, legal processing, property abatement. At a certain point, the association has to protect community standards." Community standards. She said it while standing in front of the ruins of a two-story colonial my parents bought in 1989 with overtime pay and VA financing. The smell of diesel drifted over as one of the operators shut down his machine and climbed out, looking anywhere but at me. I stared past Brenda at the remains of the dining room wall. There was still a square of faded blue paint where my mother used to hang our family calendar. "You demolished a private residence over dues?" I asked. Brenda's smile tightened, but only for a second. "Not dues," she said. "Non-compliance. Abandonment indicators. Escalating violations. This was a legal board action." Then she lifted the clipboard and tapped a packet of papers like that settled it. "You ignored every chance we gave you." The thing is, I hadn't ignored anything. I had been out of state for 6 weeks on federal assignment, and every piece of mail she claimed to send had gone to an address I hadn't used in 3 years. I could already see it from 10 feet away, the wrong unit number on the notices clipped under her thumb. A small mistake if you were honest. A useful one if you weren't. I started walking toward the slab, but a security guard in a golf cart uniform moved between us and held up one hand. "Sir, this is now an active restricted work zone." Brenda crossed one heel over the other and looked pleased with herself. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be," she said. "The sheriff's office has already been notified in case you become disruptive." I looked at the rubble, at the pieces of my home catching sunlight through the dust, and then back at Brenda. She thought she was standing in front of a broken man. She thought the worst thing that could happen here had already happened. She had no idea the worst moment of her life hadn't started yet. My father used to say a house tells on the people who built it. He said you could read a family in the wear marks on the floorboards, the dents in the workbench, the way a front door sounded when it opened after 20 winters and one bad summer drought. Standing there in the dust, staring at the wreckage, I could still read mine. That chimney in the middle of the slab was not just brick. I helped repoint those joints when I was 16, sweating through a July weekend while my father corrected every shortcut I tried to take. The concrete pad by the side yard where the excavator had chewed up my mother's rose border was where she used to set folding chairs every Thanksgiving when cousins spilled out onto the lawn. Even the cracked section of gutter hanging off the dumpster had a story. I dented it with a baseball in 9th grade and spent 2 weeks pretending I had no idea how it happened. That house sat on 1/3 of an acre in a neighborhood that liked to call itself established, which was a polite way of saying half the residents had lived there long enough to remember when the subdivision sign was new and the other half had arrived with money, opinions, and a dangerous love for committees. My parents bought the place in the fall of 1989 for $112,000. My mother was a public school librarian. My father worked building inspection for the county, the kind of man who ironed his shirts on Sunday night and believed every permit existed for a reason. They were not flashy people. They were careful people. Every cabinet handle, every ceiling fan, every azalea planted along the walkway had been chosen because it would last. After my mother got sick, the house changed from a place we lived in to a place that held us together. I can still remember the smell of chicken broth and printer paper from the stack of medical forms on the kitchen counter, the quiet hum of the oxygen machine in the back bedroom, the way evening light hit the hallway photos just before supper. When she passed, my father lasted 18 months before his own heart gave out in that same recliner by the den window. By then I was already working federal field assignments, never in one place long enough to call it home, but I never sold. The house could not do it. Some people see an empty property. I saw the last physical proof that my family had been here and done things the right way. So I kept it maintained. Taxes paid. Utilities active. Lawn service twice a month when I was out of town. Alarm system monitored. Mail forwarded to a secure box because my work kept me moving. Not abandoned. Not neglected. Just quiet. That was the word Brenda and people like her never understood. Quiet is not the same as forgotten. I had grown up around people who believed silence meant weakness, but federal work teaches you something different. Silence can be discipline. Silence can be observation. Silence can be a loaded file sitting in a drawer waiting for the right signature. I bent down near the edge of the slab and picked up a brass house key coated in grey dust. It was from the old side door off the laundry room. I rubbed it clean with my thumb and slid it into my pocket without saying a word. Behind me, Brenda kept talking to one of the board members in that smug, stage whisper tone meant to carry. She wanted the neighbors watching from their driveways to hear how reasonable she had been, how unfortunate this all was, how every step had been documented. That part almost made me smile. Documented was my favorite word in the English language. Because if there is one thing I trust more than emotion, more than memory, more than a polished woman with a clipboard and a fake sympathetic voice, it is paperwork that thinks nobody important is ever going to read it. Brenda Whitmore had the kind of face that always looked composed from a distance and pinched up close, like life had become one long exercise in tolerating other people's flaws. Up close, with dust settling on the shoulders of her cream suit and sunlight reflecting off the gold chain at her neck, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had mistaken procedure for power. "You cannot be inside the demolition zone," she said, stepping toward me with that clipboard held out in front of her like a shield. The board acted under Article 8, Section 4, Nuisance Abatement and Emergency Enforcement Authority. She said it too quickly, too cleanly, the way people do when they have rehearsed a lie until it feels almost true in their own mouth. I turned and looked at her fully for the first time. "Emergency," I repeated. "My father planted those live oaks 30 years ago. The roof was replaced last spring. The utilities are active. The tax record is current. What exactly was the emergency?" Her jaw shifted once. Tiny movement. Easy to miss unless you spend your professional life watching people talk around facts. Structural neglect. Repeated violations. Unpaid assessments. The home had become a blight risk. Blight risk. That was a new one. Behind her, one of the board members, a wiry man in a polo shirt with the HOA logo stitched over the pocket, nodded like he was approving the weather. Another woman stood beside him clutching a stainless steel tumbler and wearing the careful expression of someone who wanted front row seats without having any fingerprints on the ticket. I had seen their type before in conference rooms, deposition hallways, city offices. People who orbit confidence because they mistake it for legitimacy. "Show me the permit," I said. Brenda gave me a smile so thin it barely qualified. "That is association business. You tore down my house." It became my business the second the first board came off the frame. She glanced toward the street where 3 neighbors had wandered closer under the pretense of checking the mail. "Good. Let them hear it. Public arrogance is a beautiful thing when it starts sweating." She flipped through the packet on her clipboard with long manicured fingers and pulled out a stapled set of forms. Even from 6 feet away I could see the county seal was slightly off-center and the signature line on the demolition authorization carried the wrong formatting. Official documents are like church hymns to me. I know when a note is wrong before most people even hear the music. Brenda did not hand me the packet. She just held it high enough to imply authority. "Everything was approved," she said. "Our legal counsel reviewed the action. Our treasurer documented the dues delinquency. Our compliance committee photographed ongoing non-use over a period of 11 months. Non-use. There it was again. Quiet translated by petty people into permission. I looked past her to the front edge of the slab where the old cast-iron porch bench had been shoved upside down into a pile of brick and siding. My mother used to sit on that bench with sweet tea in August and wave at people who rarely waved back. Brenda followed my eyes and mistook grief for surrender. "Mr. Walker," she said, softening her voice into something syrupy and false, "I understand this is emotional. But the association has a duty to preserve property values. We cannot allow abandoned homes to drag down the entire neighborhood." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because people like Brenda always say the quiet part out loud right before the floor gives way beneath them. Property values. Not safety. Not law. Not urgency. Just money, image, control. I took one slow breath and tasted concrete dust on the back of my tongue. Then I noticed something tucked under the broken remains of the old den wall. A metal lockbox, dented but intact, half covered by pink fiberglass insulation. Brenda saw me see it and snapped her fingers at one of the contractors. "Remove that debris," she said quickly. Too quickly. And that was the moment I knew this was bigger than Jews, bigger than one demolished house, bigger than a bored woman with a clipboard playing queen of the cul-de-sac. She was not just trying to get rid of me. She was trying to get to something before I did. The contractor took one step toward the lockbox, then stopped when I moved first. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just deliberate enough to make him think twice about putting his hands on something that clearly did not belong to him. Dust crunched under my boots as I crossed the slab, and the heat coming off the broken concrete hit through the soles like an open oven. The box was wedged beneath a collapsed section of shelving from the den closet, the old one my father built to hold tax binders, manuals, spare keys, and every receipt he had kept since the first mortgage payment. It was a dull grey steel box, about 18 inches wide, scraped hard along one corner but still locked. I recognized it immediately. My father called it the never-touch box when I was a kid. Important papers only. Insurance riders, deeds, survey maps, copies of permits, things too valuable to trust to memory and too boring for a teenager to appreciate. Brenda's voice sharpened behind me. "That item is part of an active cleanup operation." I crouched, wrapped my fingers around the handle, and lifted it free of the debris. Heavier than I expected. That meant paper, maybe a flash drive, maybe the backup phone my father used to keep in the house after my mother got sick. The contractor looked at Brenda, then at me, then wisely decided he wanted no part of whatever this was becoming. I stood and brushed insulation off the lid. "Clean-up operation," I said. Interesting phrase for a private residence you demolished before the owner was properly notified. Brenda took a step closer. The perfume hit before her words did, something floral and expensive, trying hard to overpower the smell of diesel and broken drywall. "You were notified repeatedly," she snapped. The sweetness in her tone was gone now, replaced by that tight, clipped impatience people use when they think status alone should end a conversation. The board followed legal procedure. The structure was unsafe, delinquent, and abandoned by every practical measure. I turned the lockbox in my hands and saw a streak of blue paint on one side from the old den wall. I remembered painting that room with my mother on a rainy Saturday in 1997, the radio humming Frank Sinatra while she corrected every spot I missed near the baseboards. That room had held her bookshelves, then later my father's files. Not abandoned. Archived. Preserved. Watched over. Brenda had no idea how dangerous it is to treat a careful man's records like trash. Unsafe according to who? I asked. Your compliance committee? Your treasurer? Some lawyer who bills the board by the hour. She folded her arms over the clipboard. According to common sense. There it was again. When weak paperwork meets pressure, people fall back on phrases like common sense, community standards, practical measures. Soft language for hard wrongdoing. I slipped the lockbox under one arm and walked toward the driveway. The security guard shifted like he might block me again, but even he seemed less certain now. Good. Uncertainty spreads fast when the wronged party stops acting injured and starts acting methodical. I set the box on the tailgate of my truck and studied the debris field from a distance. The demolition had been selective in a way that bothered me. The garage wall had been flat and clean. The back bedroom windows were gone. The den closet where the files were stored had been hit early, not late. A man who has spent years investigating procurement fraud, false certifications, and municipal kickback schemes learns to recognize patterns. This did not look like a rushed emergency response. It looked like somebody knew where to aim first. Brenda must have read something in my face because she changed tactics. "Mr. Walker," she said, and the sympathy was back, pasted on like cheap wallpaper, "I really do understand that this feels personal." Feels personal. I looked at the place where my front door used to be and almost admired the nerve. "It is personal," I said. "You tore down my family home over paperwork that does not match the county file format, notices sent to the wrong address, and an emergency no one can define." One of the neighbors near the curb let out a tiny breath, the kind people make when they realize the script is shifting. Brenda heard it too. Her chin lifted half an inch. "The sheriff can sort that out when they arrive." I nodded once. "They probably can." Then I rested my hand on the lockbox and felt the cool steel under the dust. Whatever Brenda had hoped to bury under permits, penalties, and bulldozers, it had not disappeared with the walls. It was sitting 3 feet from me on my truck, and for the first time all morning, I could see something besides arrogance in her face. I could see time running out. The first deputy arrived in a tan county cruiser with the kind of slow, careful roll that told me he had already been briefed by somebody who thought the story was simple. He parked at the curb, stepped out into the dust, and rested one hand on his duty belt while he took in the excavators, the debris pile, Brenda's clipboard, and me standing by my truck with a steel lockbox under my palm. Mid-40s, sun-lined face, mirrored sunglasses, posture of a man who had spent years sorting real problems from expensive nonsense. Brenda moved before he said a word. Of course she did. She crossed the yard in those pointed heels like she was approaching a podium, not a demolition site, and launched into her practiced version before he had both boots on the grass. "Deputy Collins, thank you for coming. This homeowner is interfering with a lawful board-directed abatement after months of delinquency and abandonment. We have full documentation." Full documentation. She kept saying that phrase like repetition could sand the edges off fraud. Collins took the packet from her, glanced at the top page, then looked at me. "Sir, I need you to stay clear of the work area while we figure out what is going on." Fair enough. Neutral. Professional. But I heard the assumption under it. Dispute first. Facts later. That was fine by me. Assumptions are soft clay if you let people keep talking long enough. Deputy, I said, my name is Ethan Walker. That was my residence until this morning. I want the county demolition permit number, the name of the inspector who signed off on the unsafe structure determination, and a copy of whatever notice they claim was served. Brenda made a little scoffing sound through her nose, the kind meant for the audience more than the target. You had plenty of opportunities to engage this process, Mr. Walker. Collins held up one finger without looking at her. Small gesture. Important one. Even Brenda went quiet for half a second. He scanned the forms again. I watched his thumb pause on the second page. Then the third. Then go back. Good. He had spotted something. Maybe the parcel number. Maybe the address line. Maybe the formatting issue. Or maybe just the fact that nobody dealing in a real emergency normally carries such a polished speech. This says notices were mailed to Unit B, he said. He looked up at me. Is there a Unit B on this property? No, sir, I said. Single-family residence. One mailbox. One structure. No secondary unit. No duplex split. No accessory dwelling permit. You can verify all of that in county records in under 3 minutes. Brenda smiled too quickly. That was a clerical carryover from an older mailing template. It did not affect the validity of service. There are few sounds sweeter than a dishonest person volunteering legal conclusions in front of a deputy who did not ask for them. Collins lowered the packet a fraction. I will determine what affects validity. The neighbor with the stainless steel tumbler shifted her weight on the sidewalk. The wiry board member suddenly found his shoes fascinating. The air had changed. Same dust, same diesel, same broken house, but the mood had tilted 3 degrees off Brenda's axis, and you could feel it. She felt it too. That was why she pushed harder. Deputy, with all due respect, this property had been dormant for almost a year. Overgrown periods, dark windows, unpaid dues, repeated board outreach. We had to act before it damaged surrounding values. There it was again. Values. Not law. Not safety. Not hazard. Just values. She could not help herself. People who worship control always eventually confess what God they actually serve. Collins walked a few steps toward the slab and looked over the debris. Who authorized the equipment on site? He asked. Brenda pointed to the contractor, who suddenly looked like he would rather be laying asphalt in August than standing there in front of a deputy. Our legal counsel coordinated the vendor, she said. The board voted unanimously. And county inspection? Collins asked. Included in the packet, Brenda said. I almost corrected her, but I did not need to. He was already reading with a slower face now, less receptive, more exact. That is the thing about pressure. It does not make honest paperwork nervous. It only rattles the fake stuff. I stayed where I was, one hand on the lockbox, and said nothing. Let her fill the silence. Let her keep stacking statements, dates, assumptions, and confident little claims. The longer she talked, the more precise my memory became. The smell of dust. The wrong address. The off-center seal. The selective demolition. The hurry around the den closet. My father used to tell me that when somebody insists too hard on how clean their hands are, you should check the sink. Collins turned back toward me. Mr. Walker, do you have identification on you? Brenda's chin lifted, pleased, as if she thought the question meant I was about to be managed. I reached slowly into my jacket pocket, feeling the weight of leather, metal, and a decision I had been deliberately postponing since I pulled up and saw my life in pieces. Not yet, I told myself. Let her have one more minute. Let her build the lie tall enough that everyone in this neighborhood can hear the sound when it breaks. I pulled the leather wallet from inside my jacket slowly enough that Deputy Collins did not tense and fast enough that Brenda still thought she was about to watch me hand over an ordinary driver's license like a man asking permission to stand on his own land. The dust hung in the sunlight between us, turning everything a little gold around the edges, and for one strange second the whole cul-de-sac went quiet except for the faint tick of cooling machinery and a wind chime somewhere down the street. I flipped the wallet open and held it where Collins could see it first. His mirrored lenses caught the gold flash of the shield before his expression changed, but it changed fast after that. You learn to recognize that moment when training overrides assumption. His shoulders squared, his chin dipped, and the entire tone of the scene shifted without anyone raising their voice. Special Agent Ethan Walker, he read, and now there was no neighbor dispute in his voice, no board countercall patience, just sharp attention. United States Office of Inspector General. Brenda stopped breathing for half a beat. I saw it. Her fingers tightened around that clipboard so hard the edges bent under her nails. That is not relevant, she said, but the sentence came out thin, stripped of all the glossy confidence she had been wearing like a blazer all morning. I closed the wallet and slipped it back into my jacket. It became relevant when your board used false service, questionable demolition paperwork, and unauthorized disposal of records on a property connected to an active federal review. Collins looked from me to the lockbox. Then back to the packet in his hand. Active federal review, he asked. Yes, sir, I said. I have been working a procurement and records irregularity case involving county-adjacent vendors, shell billing, and falsified maintenance assessments across several residential associations. This address was part of my parallel document preservation list. Which means if they demolished this structure after defective notice and targeted the den file storage area first, we may be looking at obstruction issues on top of property fraud. The word obstruction landed like a dropped wrench. Heavy. Metallic. Final. Brenda tried to recover, and for a second I almost admired the reflex. This is outrageous, she said. You cannot come here after months of absence and invent a federal angle because you do not like the board's decision. I turned to her fully. You used the wrong mailing designation on legal notices. You cited abandonment while utilities remained active. You called this an emergency but cannot define a present hazard. Your county seal is off-center, your formatting does not match current permit templates, and you tried to move a secured records box the second I looked at it. I do not need to invent anything, Brenda. You already did all the hard work for me. One of the neighbors gasped softly. Not dramatic. Just a quiet involuntary sound from someone realizing the story they had been fed at brunches and board meetings was collapsing in real time. Collins handed the packet back to Brenda, but he did it with 2 fingers, like the papers had turned unpleasant in his hands. All demolition activity stops now, he said. No one touches anything else on this property until I verify the permit chain, service record, and county inspection log. Brenda blinked twice. You cannot shut down a lawful association action on the word of one homeowner. Collins did not even look at her when he answered. I can secure a disputed site where potentially invalid documents were used. And I am doing that. Then he faced the contractor. Kill the equipment. Nobody loads another piece of debris. Nobody removes so much as a brick. The contractor nodded so fast his hard hat nearly slipped. Good man. He knew a survival instruction when he heard one. A second county unit rolled up just then, gravel crunching at the curb. 2 more deputies stepped out, slower this time, eyes scanning the yard with that cautious alertness officers get when they arrive late to a situation that has already changed shape. Brenda turned toward them like a drowning woman spotting shore. Officers, this is still a civil matter, she said. This man is using intimidation and credentials to derail a board enforcement process. I almost smiled at that. People like Brenda always mistake authority for intimidation the moment it stops working for them. Collins lifted one hand again, and this time she actually fell silent. No, he said. It stopped being simple when the paperwork stopped matching the story. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of torn insulation and summer grass across the slab where my house used to stand. I rested my hand on the lockbox and looked at the broken footprint of the den, the kitchen, the front steps, every room that had shaped me. I had not raised my voice once. I had not threatened anyone. I had only opened a wallet and told the truth. And somehow that hit Brenda harder than any argument ever could. Because in that moment, with half the neighborhood watching from their driveways, she finally understood what the badge meant. She had not demolished the home of an absent man. She had just turned a quiet property owner into the last person on earth she should have tried to bury under fake paper. Once the machines went silent, the whole street sounded wrong. No engine rumble. No hydraulic hiss. Just cicadas, a dog barking 2 houses down, and the dry flap of a permit packet in Brenda Whitmore's unsteady hand. Deputy Collins stretched yellow scene tape from the surviving mailbox post to the bent frame of my front fence, and the simple act of that bright strip snapping in the wind changed everything. 20 minutes earlier, Brenda had been conducting a public execution of my family home. Now she was standing outside a restricted site, heels sinking into powdery dirt, while 2 deputies photographed her paperwork from 3 different angles. I set the lockbox flat on my tailgate and used my keyring to open the side clasp. The metal popped with a sound I had not heard in years, and inside was exactly what I had hoped for and more than Brenda could afford. My father's survey binder sat on top, thick with laminated plats, easement maps, utility records, and county correspondence going back 3 decades. Under that was a sealed accordion file labeled Association Notices, which told me my father had already started organizing concerns long before he died. Beneath that, wrapped in a freezer bag to keep out moisture, sat a slim external hard drive and an old backup phone with a charging cable rubber-banded around it. Brenda saw the drive and went pale in a way expensive makeup cannot hide. It drained her face from the eyes outward. That material may include private association communications, she said, and there it was again, the instinct to control the paper before the paper could speak. You are not authorized to access board records. I looked at her and almost felt sorry for how deeply she misunderstood the ground under her feet. It came out of my den closet, I said. On property titled in my name. Anything in that box starts with my chain of custody. Collins stepped closer. Agent Walker, do you need county evidence support? In a minute, I said. Then I opened the accordion file. The first page was a copy of an HOA due statement addressed to Unit B again. Wrong address. Same error pattern. The next page was better. A letter from my father to the association treasurer, dated 14 months before his death, disputing late fees that had been added after a check cleared. Attached was a bank copy showing the payment processed on time. Then another letter. Then another. Same theme every time. Duplicate charges. Administrative penalties. Threats escalating faster than logic. My father had annotated the margins in block handwriting with the same red pen he used for grocery lists and property taxes. Applied twice. Unsupported fee. Request proof. No response. The smell of old paper rose in the heat, dry and faintly sweet, and for a second I could see him at the den desk with his reading. Glasses low on his nose, sorting truth from nonsense one receipt at a time. A deputy whistled softly beside me when I reached the hard drive inventory note clipped to the back folder. Vendor spreadsheet copies. Board reimbursement scans. Meeting audio backups. Collins looked at Brenda. Did your association maintain financial records off-site? Brenda swallowed. Our treasurer handled archiving. Name? Collins asked. Greg Hollister, she said, and the answer came too fast, like she had been afraid of not answering at all. Good. Fear loosens things. I plugged the old phone into a portable battery from my truck console and watched the screen flicker awake through a spiderweb crack. My father had labeled the audio app folders by month. Meeting recordings. Reserve study calls. Vendor discussions. Quiet men keep loud evidence. I handed Collins the binder first, then the file with the disputed notices. Start with service defects and duplicated assessments, I said. Then compare any demolition vendor on her packet against board reimbursement records and county billing. If my parallel case is touching this the way I think it is, Brenda did not just overreach. She stepped into a pipeline that has been skimming, papering over, and calling it compliance for years. Across the yard, one of the board members slipped backward toward his car like a man who suddenly remembered another appointment. A deputy stopped him with nothing more than a glance and a raised palm. The neighbors were no longer pretending to check mail. They stood openly now, coffee cups in hand, eyes fixed on Brenda as the story she had sold them started shedding pieces in the sunlight. She hugged that clipboard to her chest like it could still save her. But paper only protects you when it is honest, and hers had already started coming apart in public. Deputy Collins moved fast once the pattern showed itself. He called County Dispatch for permit verification, requested the inspection log tied to Brenda's packet, and asked one of the other deputies to hold everyone on site until names, roles, and vendor affiliations were recorded. The cul-de-sac had gone from neighborhood theater to something colder and more exact. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Even the summer air felt tighter, like the whole street knew it had crossed into official memory. I stood at my tailgate with the old phone charging in my hand and watched the screen crawl back to life one stubborn percentage at a time. Then the first voicemail notification appeared. Not from family. Not from friends. From my father, forwarded to himself from the HOA office line nearly 2 years earlier. I opened the audio file and held the speaker low between Collins and me. Brenda's voice came through thin but unmistakable, polished even over bad compression. Mr. Walker, if you keep disputing every fee, the board may have to consider stronger remedies. Some homes become easier to deal with once the paperwork catches up. There was a pause, then my father's voice, older and tired but still steady. You keep adding charges after payment clears. I want proof, not threats. The line clicked dead after that, but I did not need more. Collins looked at me, then at Brenda, whose face had taken on that brittle stillness people get when denial is burning too much energy to move. Do you want me to keep going? I asked. He nodded once. I opened the next recording. This one was from a board meeting. Greg Hollister, the treasurer, speaking too casually about aged accounts, non-responsive properties, and how certain lots could be repositioned if dues pressure became severe enough. Repositioned. That was the word he used, like family homes were chess pieces and grief was just bad accounting. Then another voice, one I later matched to the board attorney, mentioning contractor friends who could handle nuisance abatements cheaply if county paperwork was pre-aligned. Pre-aligned. Crooked people love professional words. They think vocabulary can launder intent. By the time the third file finished, one of the deputies had come back from his cruiser with a different look in his eyes. County says there is no final unsafe structure sign-off in the system for this parcel, he told Collins. There is a draft intake note from last month, but no approved demolition authorization. Also, the permit number on her packet belongs to a detached garage removal on Maple Crest, different subdivision. Brenda made a strangled little sound, not quite a protest, not quite a denial, just the noise of certainty giving way under expensive shoes. Collins turned to her. At this point I need you to stop talking about legality unless you are answering a direct question. That landed in front of the neighbors like a dropped plate. You could feel the shock ripple through them. The woman with the tumbler lowered it slowly. The man in the polo stared at Brenda like he had never actually seen her before. One of the older residents near the sidewalk muttered, "I knew something was off with those late fees, and that was all it took." Another voice added, "My sister got charged twice last year." Then another. "They threatened my mother over weeds that were on the easement." Fear breaks all at once sometimes. A whole street can find its spine in under 10 seconds if the bully finally looks beatable. Collins asked for Greg Hollister's home address. Brenda hesitated. Bad choice. The second deputy wrote something down and repeated the question more firmly. She gave the address. Then came the vendor name. Then the attorney. Then the private mailbox used for treasurer correspondence. Every answer cost her something visible. Her posture. Her voice. That lacquered confidence. I kept sorting the contents of the lockbox while she unraveled. Under the hard drive inventory sheet, I found copies of reimbursement requests to the Association for Contractor Consultations that matched names I had seen before in my federal case notes. Same shell vendor structure. Same round dollar billing. Same pattern of maintenance emergencies used to justify fast payouts with weak backup. My house had not been targeted because it was neglected. It had been targeted because it was quiet, document-heavy, and owned by someone they thought was absent enough to steamroll. Brenda had not just destroyed property. She had stepped on a live wire connected to a bigger machine than she understood. A black county sedan turned into the street 20 minutes later, followed by an investigator from the district attorney's office and a county code supervisor with a tablet tucked under one arm. The code supervisor took one look at the slab, one look at the packet, and asked the question I had been waiting for all morning. Who ordered demolition before permit finalization? Nobody answered. The wind moved through the taped-off yard, carrying dust across the broken footprint of my home. Brenda's clipboard hung limp at her side now, no longer a symbol, just cardboard and paper and sweat. The house was gone. That truth did not change. But standing there in the silence after the question, with the wrong documents exposed and the whole neighborhood watching, I realized something else had changed too. The ruins beneath our feet were no longer evidence of my loss alone. They were evidence against her. By late afternoon the light had gone amber over Cedar Run Drive, the kind of Texas light that makes everything look softer than it deserves. It did nothing for the slab. It did nothing for the broken chimney, the torn insulation cord in the fence, or the pieces of my mother's kitchen still mixed with dirt and brick. Loss does not become prettier just because the sun gets low. The district attorney investigator took statements in the shade of a county sedan while the code supervisor photographed every corner of the site and tagged the false permit packet into evidence. Greg Hollister was reached by phone first, then in person by another unit across town, and from the look Collins gave me when he stepped away from that call, the treasurer had started talking faster than a man with nothing to hide. Brenda did not say much after that. The woman who had narrated my ruin all morning now stood silent beside the curb, her cream suit powdered gray at the hem, one heel scuffed, both hands wrapped around a paper cup of water she never drank. Every so often she looked at the neighbors, maybe hoping for support, maybe expecting the old fear to rise and carry her through one more ugly scene. It did not. Once people smell the truth, they stop inhaling lies. Mrs. Delaney from 2 houses over walked up carrying a manila folder and handed it to Deputy Collins without even looking at Brenda. "These are my notices," she said. "They charged my husband after he died." Another neighbor followed with screenshots. Another with bank statements. By 5 o'clock the same sidewalk where Brenda used to patrol for mailbox violations had turned into a line of residents offering paper, dates, voices, proof. My father would have appreciated the irony. He always said the cleanest justice starts with a stack of ordinary documents and one person finally deciding not to stay quiet. I stood at the tailgate of my truck with the lockbox open and watched the case widen in real time. The hard drive was bagged. The phone was logged. The survey binder went with the investigator because it showed something else Brenda had either missed or ignored, my lot line cut 3 feet farther into what the association had been calling common landscaping for years. Another quiet theft hiding under decorative mulch and neighborhood language. Collins came back over just as the heat started bleeding out of the day. "They are freezing association accounts pending review," he said. "County is opening an emergency inquiry on permit misuse. District attorney wants the board attorney, treasurer, and vendor contracts first thing tomorrow." He paused, eyes moving to the slab behind me. "I am sorry about your house." It was the first honest sentence anybody had given me all day about the thing that mattered most. I nodded once because anything more would have sat too heavy in my throat. "Thank you," I said. Across the street, Brenda finally spoke, but not to me. To Collins. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. Her voice sounded smaller now, stripped of Polish, almost ordinary. Collins did not even turn fully toward her. "No," he said. You were protecting a story. That is different. I looked at the place where my front steps used to be and let that settle in. He was right. She had not believed in standards or safety or service. She had believed in the performance of control, in the kind of paper power that works only until somebody with real authority reads the fine print. The house was gone. I could not sign a form and bring back my mother's curtains or my father's den,